Let's now bring in my panel. Sultan joining me here in studio and Gadi Adelman joining us via Skype. Both are counter-terrorism experts. Gadi, let's start with you. The terrorist group Hamas is praising the attack that killed this baby. They said in a statement that it proved that the resistance was still alive in the West Bank. It seems as though there are now direct links to Hamas and those responsible for the attack. There is a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Certainly doesn't feel like it to those that were shot at. Should Hamas be held responsible for this?
Yes, thank you for having me, Michelle. Absolutely. You know, you and I have done this too many times before. Before I answer that question, I do want to say, you know, I watched the funeral of the infant earlier this evening, Israeli time, and they named the child Ami Ad Yisrael, which means the people of Israel are here forever. And that's, you know, that's what's going to happen. Israel's going to go on and they're going to continue to fight this daily fight. But Hamas definitely needs to be held responsible.
Some in the Israeli Knesset or parliament are saying that there isn't a sufficient deterrence on the side of the Israelis against these terrorist attacks. Naftali Bennett, the education minister, saying that terrorists get rewarded by Palestinian leadership and that Israel isn't doing enough to crack down on this. What do you make of this? Is Israel too soft on terrorists?
I don't think Israel's too soft on terrorists. I mean, you know, we've got a 100-person showdown outside of the house of that family. The challenge, I think, that we're going to have on an ongoing basis, until you and I have had this discussion multiple times, is a two-state solution, a three-state solution. You know, until there is some forward movement in terms of the negotiations in between Israel and Hamas, we're continuing to see a stalemate, and that stalemate is leading to the gangland type attacks.
But there is no one to negotiate with, is what Israel would argue, that there is no cohesive Palestinian leadership. Hamas, for one, doesn't want to negotiate, and there isn't a unified government between Fatah and Hamas.
That goes again back to the two-state, three-state conversation, right? I think realistically, you know, looking at also where the Trump administration stands in line towards these things, is that we're going to have to start pushing Hamas a little bit, and we may also have to start pushing inside of Ramallah a little bit to kind of get to the conversations that need to be had, because it's not really acceptable to have this ongoing violence on a continual basis.
Can you have a conversation with a group that is sworn to Israel's destruction, whose motive is to wipe Israel off the map?
You're going to have to. You know, I mean, it's and that's the unfortunate reality of it, because if that does not transpire, we end up with this perpetual loop, which only continues to devolve for the Israelis and the Palestinians as well.
Gadi, as we heard our reporter there are now Israeli Defense Forces surrounding the house of the suspected terrorist or confirmed terrorist that now has been killed. Now, this is done to counter the pay-for-slay program of the Palestinian leadership. That is, of course, the financial rewards given to terrorists and their families. So Israel has this policy of destroying the home of the terrorist to disincentivize attacks. Gadi, is this effective? Or does this play into Hamas's hands by, for one, creating more hate and also creating unfavorable media coverage for Israel?
Well, unfortunately, the destruction of the houses, as you well know, doesn't seem to happen as much as the law calls for, because each time the families will go to the Israeli High Court, the equivalent of the Supreme Court, and more often than not, that's overturned. And what will happen is one portion of the house may be demolished or nothing at all will happen. So it really is not the deterrent it was set out to be when it became law in Israel. But there needs to be more done, obviously. I don't necessarily agree with Sultan there as far as a two-state or three-state solution. This is what we see from the so-called neighbors of Israel. This every single time. Israel disengaged from Gaza fully in 2005, and that has been answered by thousands and tens of thousands of rockets. There is no negotiating with terrorists, period. And until the Palestinians, the so-called Palestinians, decide to change the way they educate, things were prior to 1993, prior to the Oslo Accord, things were better for everyone on the ground there. Israelis, Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Palestinians, everyone, things were better. This is what we have seen since they became in charge of their own people. And it's not going to stop unless they stop educating hate.
Well, Europe is now dealing with the same Islamic terrorism that Israel knows all too well. Gadi and Naza, stick around because I want to get your take on that Islamic terrorist attack in France. And the latest there is that police are continuing their manhunt for the suspected terrorist who opened fire at a Christmas market in Strasbourg. At least 3 people confirmed dead and a dozen wounded in that attack. France has now raised its national security alert across the country. Our international affairs correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has more on the story.
Heavily armed police, closed stalls, the Strasbourg Christmas market the day after a gunman opened fire, killing at least 3 and injuring 12. Wednesday saw heightened security in Strasbourg and at the border with Germany, only 20 minutes away from the market. 350 officers still on the hunt for the 29-year-old assailant who was known by authorities.
Sharif C. was born on February 24, 1989 in Strasbourg. His police record shows 27 convictions for common law crimes committed for the near totality in France, but also in Germany and Switzerland. He has been jailed on several occasions and was known by the penitential services for his radicalization.
The gunman was already on a watch list with over 20,000 names, 4,000 of those considered dangerous.
Considering the target, his way of operating, his profile, and the testimonies of those who heard him yell Allahu Akbar, the anti-terrorist police were called into action last evening.
France has seen a wave of terrorist attacks in the past years, with about 250 people killed by terrorism since 2015.
We talk a lot about the punishment for these kinds of actions, but not enough about the measures that should be taken to prevent them. We've had close to 26 attacks since 2012. There is clearly a need to reinforce the cooperation between the different security forces.
Up to 2 million people visit the Strasbourg Christmas market every year.
I think Strasbourg is a symbolic city in Europe, and the Christmas market is a great symbol of the city of Strasbourg and our culture. They ruined our Christmas.
Despite President Macron's promise to make the fight against terrorism a priority, France remains a target. Bianca Zanini, I24 News.
And we're back with Gadi Adelman and our Sultan, our panel of counterterrorism experts. As according to police, the suspect, who was born in Strasbourg, was already known to security services as a possible Islamist terrorist threat. That's correct. Was there any way that they should have acted differently to try and prevent this? Is it possible to monitor everyone that is a suspected terrorist threat?
I think there's multiple ways they could have done this. There was an audit done of the French police forces and the national military, and they came down to basically find out that they are discoordinated and they do not share information effectively with each other. This is a trend that we've seen across Europe going all the way back to Belgium. It's just a discoordination in between forces. And I'll say 3 things to this. 1 is that needs to be improved. 2 is that they need to have engagement with some of these radicalized youth, because there are processes by which we can disengage them, but a lot of that involves...
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, I had published in the U.S. Army Cyber Defense Review what the full radicalization process is for ISIS, right? And if we look at many of these other organizations, Abu Sayyaf, so on and so forth, and we look at where they are radicalizing online now, a lot of what they're looking for is this type of disenfranchised youth. They find them where they don't really have a place or a home inside of France.
This is a man that was born in the city, though.
Correct, but this may be someone who does not see himself as French the way that the French don't allow people who are not French to be seen as French. And that dissonance is what really allows them to leverage radicalization very effectively.
Gadi, is this just a new reality for Europe here? I mean, how can this ideology be countered? We've heard Oz's suggestion. Is there a way to counter this Islamist jihadist ideology?
Unfortunately, we have to try and prevent from what just happened from happening again. And he's right. First of all, you and I have discussed this. There are 55,000 people in France right now on a watch list. It is impossible for them to watch each and every one. Then you have the fact, and I heard today through various sources, that they actually showed up at this individual's house and he had already left and committed this attack. So, you know, you have a situation in France ongoing right now with the yellow vests that pulled a lot of police resources that could have been doing other things, many of whom are with the anti-terror force, that were pulled because of what's going on nationally. So you have that aspect as well. But as far as this radicalization or becoming a jihadist, this may very well, and I think even Mr. Sultan will agree with me, may very well have taken place in prison.
An interesting point. Gadi, thank you so much. Gadi Adelman and Sultan, thank you both for your time and analysis.